Welcome everyone to the interview with author Gail Carriger. Gosh, I don't even know what wondrous things to say about you to introduce you. I was introduced to your skills as an author and a writer by reading the Parasol Protectorate, and I was thoroughly entertained and enthralled. And when they were coming out, I read the first three, and I went, "There's supposed to be two more." And when are the two more coming out? And so I waited, and when they came out, I grabbed them up and read them and enjoyed them too, and was pleased and thrilled, and I can't even think of enough positive
Superlatives.
What's that?
Superlatives.
So enough superlatives, exactly, enough superlatives to describe how much I enjoyed the series, and I have enjoyed other books that you've written as well.
Well, thank you
So
very much.
welcome to Confluence and Confluence and whatever madness we have endeavored to create this weekend. My name is Kevin Hayes, and I am your host. I don't know how to describe myself. I'm a writer too, with a lot less success than you have had, but I don't devote myself quite to it the way you do either. So with that, I would say, let me make some noise and get started with the interview, if you will. I have several questions. Hopefully each question will engender other questions. I speak to the panelists, and I would ask that if you have questions, please put them in the QA rather than in the chat, because I may miss them if they scroll past, and I will be sure to keep track of the Q&A, and we'll see where we go. Let's see what kind of fun we can have. When did you first decide, or when did you first want to be a writer? I'm sure you've been asked that question dozens of times.
I have, and my pat answer is generally I didn't want to be a writer. I grew up surrounded by a lot of artists, many of whom were poets, and the one thing I knew was that writers were poor, and it was no good way to make a living. So it was a terrible idea to be a writer as a career path. And so I thought, well, do archaeology instead, because that's extremely so lucrative.
So lucrative, yes, and also the admiration of millions and that sort of thing. Sure.
Yes, yeah. Laboring in obscurity in laboratories. Yes. So I didn't want to be a professional writer. I'm not one of those people. In fact, I was working on my PhD for archaeology and teaching and stuff at the time that I first got published. But I did always write, and I always say that when I was a little kid, my mom would read to me out loud, and she has strongly contributed to my voice as a writer. She's quite British. And she would read me all of these British children's books, like The Wind in the Willows, The Secret Garden, and The Little Princess, and stuff like that. And that definitely influenced me quite a bit. But if it had an ending that I didn't like, I would tell her to stop, and then I would rewrite the ending for her out loud. And didn't like means not happy ending. I was like, well, we have to change that. And so and I'm always like, Ma, you should have known from the start that this was my destiny, was to be a writer, because I was writing before I could write as a real little kid.
So you were always telling stories. It's the matter of putting them down on paper.
Yeah, and I always wrote. I used to go to a local convention, and so I was on the sort of traditional path of a writer in the early days of sci-fi fantasy, which is I submitted to short story markets, and then eventually got around to writing a novel, and that didn't sell, and another one, and another one, and another one, and another one, and another one. Until finally, I was just writing to sort of amuse myself, and if I finished something, I would be like, oh, I might as well get it out there. So I got a couple of short stories published that way, and then I wrote Solus that way, and suddenly everything changed after that.
Well, that's a good thing, I guess.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you point out the fact that if there were elements in the story or the book that you were being read, you said, no, this is the way it should be.
It should be, yes. Yes.
Kevin
Well, it's always
Costner,
a bossy
when
bit.
when Kevin Costner directed Dances with Wolves, he was asked in an interview about, did you watch all of the great directors before you did Dances with Wolves? He said, I watched them, but I watched a lot of bad ones too. And they said, well, why? And he said, well, I wanted to learn what mistakes not to make.
Yeah.
And I went, that's brilliant.
I think that's useful. It's a good idea to train your eye as both a reader and a writer as to, I like this, I don't like this. A lot of it is a matter of personal taste, but sometimes when you think I don't like this, it's actually the writer has made a mistake in like taking you down one path and setting up your expectations one way, and then they failed to fulfill those expectations. And sometimes it's just like, oh, this is my preference. And, from doing that as a very young kid, I was like, oh, my preference is for a happy ending. Like, I don't like killing off characters. Like, there are these things that as a reader, I don't like. I really love found family. I love like specific things.
Sure.
And sort of learning what I wanted to fix in the books I read kind of taught me what I wanted to write going forward as an author. Sure. And that's part of the sort of non-verbal contract that authors have with their readers. And not all readers can identify what it is about an author that they really gravitate towards. But I think it behooves the author to figure that out for themselves.
One of the things that I like about your books, one of the things that I like about the stories that you share, is that the characters are not handed their happy endings. They have to work towards those.
They do.
They have to have
true.
them as their goal. This is what I want.
Yes.
And this is why.
Yeah, and also learning that about themselves. And I mean, in Solace, I literally have the character stated outright. She's like, I don't feel like I have a purpose. I don't think she's like, I don't feel useful. And that's me being like, this is my character's void. What she needs is purpose, and her happy ending is going to involve purpose. It will also involve a partner and friends and all of this other stuff, but for her, the void that she needs to fill is her purpose and function.
Sure.
and where she belongs as a woman in a Victorian world, where women are not supposed to have purpose beyond being a wife, right?
Unless of course you're the queen.
Unless of course you're the queen.
You said something that sparked a thought, and of course I put it out before it could get to my mouth.
It happens to me all the time.
How long does it take you to produce a book? Oh, I remembered what I was going to say. When you were talking about the happy endings and the goals and everything, I was also going to say, how much did that idea affect your latest work, which is the nonfiction, the heroine's journey?
Profoundly, because I realized I was gravitating nearly constantly to the heroine's journey as a narrative device, which encompassed a lot of things that I use constantly as a writer. And so I would talk about it all the time at conventions and on panels and stuff. And people didn't know, people are very familiar with the hero's journey, but they're not familiar with the heroine's journey. And it's materially different in terms of like goals and definitions of success and strength and and quest and all that sort of thing. And so I was like, but it's there, like it's the alternative. Like, why do you mean, what do you mean you don't know about it? And I use it all the time. Like all of these major movies have used it and television shows and all this sort of stuff. And finally I was like, well, we need a reference book for this. And so I ended up writing it. But also because a lot of the things I gravitate towards, starting with, science fiction and fantasy, but also like romance and stuff, is kind of critically disenfranchised by the literary critics. And that also has to do with the fact that we who write genre and commercial genre fiction in particular tend to employ the heroine's journey quite a bit. And it's been sort of critically panned ever since the Victorian era. So I kind of go into the history of that as well, and why comedies never win awards.
The Academy Awards, yeah.
That kind of thing.
And even though there's, oh, this is such a wonderful film, this is such a wonderful actor or actress, but it's comedy and it just doesn't
Yeah. I
mean as
mean,
much.
something that makes you laugh is always taken less seriously than something that can make you cry. And of course, the secret that most authors and directors don't tell you is that it's a lot harder to make people laugh than it is to make them cry. Pathos is easy.
Yeah,
It's making
yeah,
someone crack a smile
yeah.
is real hard.
I
It's a
have to
challenge.
agree with you there. I've tried my hand at well, I write silly stuff, or stuff like a joke with a punchline, and that's the way it works. But yeah, it's a lot easier to write the dramatic and the serious, ooh, than it is to write the light and the humorous or even the satirical. I have a lot of respect for Terry Pratchett,
Oh my
uh,
God, Douglas Adams, Jasper Ford,
Douglas Adams.
and Christopher Moore.
There's Timmons Essayist here in Pittsburgh, who has a wonderfully sardonic wit, and it translates into his stories and the stuff that he writes too. Um, just to give him a little plug, he couldn't be with us this weekend. Sad. Uh, oh, it looks like we have some questions. Let's see, what kind of wondrous questions do we have? Have you found yourself during the writing process in a situation where the characters weren't cooperating in
Oh
telling the
yes.
story that you envisioned? What did you do in response?
Kind of depends on the character. Most of the time when my characters are misbehaving, it's my fault. I've like put the wrong characters into the scene to convey information or to have action happen, or the pacing is off. Like it's something is happening in the background that says me that's trying to tell me that there's a hiccup in the process of my writing rather than I'm pretty intentional. I usually have a pretty strong guidelines and stuff. So if something goes that pear-shaped, then I tend to backpedal a little bit, or I'll throw an explosion in there and then figure out what's going on later. Um,
Distract the characters, keep them
Distract the
busy so you can go to
characters.
work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes I need to jump. Generally, I'm pretty linear in how I write, but occasionally I need to jump to scenes. I'm a weird writer in that I tend to write kind of the first half of a book pretty linearly. At some point during that first half, I might come up with a better start scene. And so I'll go back and rewrite the very, very beginning. And then about halfway through to 2/3 of the way through, I will jump and write the ending. I'll suddenly know what the ending is. I like to write to a known point. I'm like the opposite of an exploration writer. I have to know where I'm going. I always
Mhm.
like to say that I can't even take a bike ride without purpose. Like I have to, I need like a task. If I'm like, do we need milk? Okay, I'll go bike and get milk. I can't just take a bike ride. And I'm like that as a writer. And so, and I'll write the end scene and then I'll go back and like write the rest of the book at that juncture. So I'm weirdly non-linearly. And so sometimes like I'll hit up a point in the book, usually about halfway to 2/3 of the way through, where I'm like, oh, it's time to do that first scene, or oh, it's time to write that end scene. And so if the characters aren't cooperating, that's what's going on in personally in my sort of creative process. But yeah, generally speaking, if my characters aren't cooperating with me, then there's something wrong with what I'm doing in my plot. And that's because I write character driven. So my kind of baseline point to get back into a scene or to get momentum going is dialogue, usually between two characters. So if I stick two characters into dialogue mode, that's very easy for me to write usually because I know both my characters really well. I literally see them talking to each other as if it's being filmed on a movie set. And if I can't do that, then there's something seriously wrong with it. That doesn't happen to me very often because I do know my characters so well and I know that they're going to start talking to each other. And I can always cut the bit where they're warming up to whatever the purpose is of that scene. I can always, change that or
Sure.
cut that later.
Sure. It's just cutting off the frayed ends that get to the fabric of the conversation.
Yeah, to make it cleaner.
Yeah, it's hard question now. This is incisive. Like I had sent the email saying I'm not an incisive interviewer like Dick Cavett or William F. Buckley. This is going to put the lie to that statement. Are you a pumpkin spice person or do you have any fall favorite teas and snacks?
Oh, That's a good question. I'm okay with pumpkin spice. I don't like the pumpkin spice latte trend, and that's because I have a near pathological aversion to drinking sugar. I have a terrible sweet tooth, and I discovered at some point in my teen years that like drinking one of them Starbucks drinks is about the same as eating a piece of cake, and I was like, this girl will eat the cake. So no more of those drinks. I would always rather eat my calories is my kind of motto. So I don't drink any of those kinds. I don't drink sweet drinks at all. I don't drink soda. I don't drink anything like that.
You drink your tea with milk in it?
I drink my tea with milk, but that's the only sweetener.
Okay.
Yeah. And I do drink certain teas black, many teas black,
Okay.
black or
Okay.
green or white or whatever. I will drink
Okay.
the sacred leaf in its in various different forms.
Mhm.
So I like it. I don't really. I guess I kind of go seasonal. I sort of have teas throughout the day that I rotate through more than anything else. So like English breakfast for the beginning of the day, or Assam or something strong and black with milk in it. And then I like a Thai tea, a hot Thai tea, not a Thai iced tea, because it has a kind of perfumey note to it, and I can have it with or without milk. So it's a good on the road tea for me. And then I have a sort of a cinnamon black that I like that kind of is a more sort of, I guess, wintry fall sea flavor. And I drink a lot of chai. I like chai a lot too, again, because I can have it with or without milk. So those are a lot of my go-tos for variance. And it usually has just as a caffeine content thing. So Thai tea doesn't have that much caffeine in it, even though it's black. So if it's later on in the afternoon, I'll go for that. So I'm not too caffeinated for bed.
There you go. That's one of my great issues too. I could drink coffee until well into, but then I might as well just stay up and not go to bed.
Exactly. And there are, to get back to the original question, there are certainly things that I love to eat when fall comes around. Like I am a big fan of pumpkin pie, and pecan pie and those sorts of like fall American flavors. So I will go for those sorts of things. Yeah. But it is the sweets the actual sweets that I go for rather than the drinks.
I'm going to jump to another question. This is one that I had on my tablet here, on my clipboard. It has your background, or does your background in archaeology ever come out, or does it direct in your stories and the things that you write, or does it direct the stories or your characters?
I think it does. I talked a little bit about this on some of my other panels, so I apologize for repeating myself. But my world building and characterization building is very object driven. So what people wear and own, and a lot of my characters have like representative items. So Alexia has her sort of Swiss Army knifed parasol, and Sophronia has her bladed fan. And Ivy has her ridiculous hat. So my characters kind of have objects that they're associated with. And I think that's a very archaeological approach, is to think about culture and character in terms of physical items, because that's the record we get. So that in that way, it is influenced. Because I was an archaeologist, I traveled and lived in various places all around the world, and I tend to take my characters to places that I have actually visited. So that also influences my book. So where they travel are often places I have been, and I've added places into that rotation as I've traveled later on in my life as an author as well. And occasionally have accidentally promised to put places into books to heads of state and then had to do it. Singapore.
Not going to name names, but Singapore.
Not going to name names. Singapore.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then if there is an archaeological or historical site mentioned in my book, it's usually a place I either worked on or visited or advised on or spent some time there. So that's another tell. So there's an Etruscan site in Blameless that was my first excavation site, and then the site that they visit in the Peruvian highlands in Competence, where the Pichtacos are hiding out, is is all of that site is the last excavation site I was on. So yeah, I sneak it in.
Very nice. I've wondered that myself, because I had dreams of being an archaeologist when I was a youth, and up until probably I was about 15 or 16, I was going, yes, I'm going to be an archaeologist. And then I didn't. But it's stuff that I still find interesting. So
it's a wonderful profession, I have to say. I do miss it. It was my passion, and I loved it. But
cool.
So is writing. So,
Nice.
Not everybody is lucky enough to get to choose between two things that they really want to do.
Two passions. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Let's see. Let's find something else here. Oh gosh, is it only that late? Whoa. We've still got lots of time. Oh my gosh.
Don't worry.
I'm going to go. I'm not going to use one of these questions. I'm going to go back and use one of mine, and ask, how long does it take you to produce a book?
Right. So it kind of depends. Obviously, it depends on the book, and it depends on my situation. But as a general rule, it takes me about 6 months to write something. A little bit longer if it's a historically set thing, because I gotta do more research for those. And that's if I'm doing good, and that's usually about 3 or 4 months to lay the words down, and then a couple of months to do revisions. Mm-hmm. I tend to do I need to do multiple revision passes. I'm a big reviser, and that's because the only way I can get the words out is to not allow myself to revise along the way. So my rules for myself for writing, because I'm such a perfectionist, and so for years when I was a baby writer before everything happened, I would just rewrite the first 3 chapters over and over and over again, and try and never finish anything. And so the rule that I established is I'm only allowed to reread whatever I wrote the day before. And that's usually about 2,000 words. So I write 2,000 words, and then I shut it down and go off and do my thing, or more if I'm feeling in the mood. And then the next day I can reread those 2,000 and write the next 2,000. And I'm allowed to sort of edit a bit of the ones I wrote the day before. But I can't read any further back in time. I have to just do. And that's the only way I manage to finish anything is by forcing myself to not revise until the very end.
Until the whole thing is ready to be revised. Yeah.
Yes.
That makes sense, certainly.
Yeah, and part of that is because I am an outliner, I'm not a pantser, so I usually have a very clear thing to do. Mm-hmm. And also another thing I've learned after 30 books and 11 years is that each book is different, and each book is going to have different problems, and each book is going to be a different process. So every time I think I've ironed out my process, something else happens. So right now, for example, I just haven't really been able to write for most of quarantine, just too weirdly psychologically affected, I think. And I finally just started to write something recently, but it's something completely different, something totally new, and something totally exploratory. And I'm pantsing it, which I've pretty much never done. I've never just written a book without an outline before, and that's because I don't know what I'm doing with this book. I don't know where it's going. I have no idea. And I'm about halfway through, and I realize I finally have a concrete idea on all of the world building, and all of the characters and everything. But I am going to have to stop halfway through and revise the whole thing, because it's such a big switchover that there's no point in me writing the second half without the 2 parts matching up properly. Sure. So I'm breaking my own rule with this new book, which is just goes to show that the creative process is highly unpredictable, even for an OCD person like me who tries to make it predictable. The short answer is 6 months usually, and then so it's usually 6 to 8 months for a longer book. It takes me, and that's about what it is for a book as part of a series. So for a traditional publisher or whatever, and then they usually take about a year to get it out into the world. So that's why there's always a delay. If it's me writing it, I'm usually writing something in the spring that will come out the next spring. But those books, the shorter works, the novellas and stuff like that, I can monkey with the timeline quite tighter if I need to. So I have managed to write and produce 1 book from start to finish in 6 months, but that is about as like to publication in 6 months when it's a self-published book, but that's about as fast as I'll go. And that's because I am a perfectionist, and I have many contract workers who I hire as part of my self-publishing process. So I have a developmental editor, a copy editor, and a proof editor, and then 4 beta readers. And so coordinating them on a timeline is what tends to slow down the process.
Sure. And when you were talking about your process, I know exactly what your process is. Your process is whatever gets the book written the way it needs to be done, and that's
as quickly
the
as
process.
possible. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have I said keeping in mind your travel schedule, and of course with the current situation that sort of puts the lie to that statement, but typically looking at your travel schedule, what is your typical writing schedule? If you are doing the travel that you generally do, where do you
fit in writing?
Slide in the time to write? Yeah.
So I do block times when I don't travel. So I don't like traveling when other people are traveling. So I never travel during November and December, or sometimes at the very beginning of November, because that's World Fantasy. But other than that, I tend to not travel during those 2 months because too many other people are traveling who don't normally travel. And I don't like them interfering with
amateurs.
Amateurs on the road. Can't have that. So I don't travel then. And there tends to be nothing that happens in January anyway, and most of February. So I tend to have a 4-month block really where I do quite a bit of writing and processing and goal stuff. That's also, taxes and all that other stuff as well, because it's the end and beginning of the year.
That's what it is. Yeah.
It is what it is. And then, so my travel schedule tends to be the con schedule. So it starts in late March kind of thing, and then goes into September or October. That's when most conventions are. And
Sure.
So I try to do it. So I start dropping book releases. So I used to have a spring release, which generally is a Parasol verse novella. And then I will have a summer release, which used to be my traditional published books. They usually drop in the summertime. And then I would do a fall release, which is whatever passion project I'm working on right now. So something like The Fifth Gender or a San Andreas book or the nonfiction book, which I just dropped. So, that's kind of, and so those are times when I'm less likely to be writing because I'm doing promo stuff. And then if I have gaps or months in the middle there, I happen to be home for June or something, that I'll write during that month. And my projects just tend to kind of fall out that way. I also start and end the year with writing retreats, and I produce a lot of words when I'm on a writing retreat. It's my best, most productive time. So on a 2-week writing retreat, I can do 40,000 words, and I expect myself to do 40,000 words, so I can churn out an entire novella at a writing retreat, or the second half of a book, if that's what I'm working on at the time.
When you say a writing retreat, are you saying a week long or a 2-week long?
So they're mostly week long now.
Okay.
I look for 2-weekers, but they are really, really rare. It's rare to have any writers who can take off that much time, because most writers also have day jobs. So I have a week-long one at the beginning of March, and then usually a week-long one, which is actually a long weekend, but I add a couple of days and just work there by myself in the winter time. So I and I'm always looking for other writing retreats, and it's usually 20 authors, most of whom are professional or semi-professional. And so it's us writing all day long in silence. It's not like a critique group or anything like that. And then there's often proof of write, which basically just means you read a little bit of what you wrote, no critique, and then you eat, and then you drink and gossip. And it's the greatest thing in the world, as far as I'm concerned.
So it's basically writing alone with a bunch of friends.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I love writing with people. So I will cafe write with friends. During lockdown, I've been just virtually writing with friends often. I'm just a competitive person, I think, more competitive than I'd like to admit. And just having someone across the table and be able to look up and be like, how many words have you done? Oh, I gotta keep going. It's really helpful for me. for my psychosis.
That brings me to what was it? Oh, one of the questions from Stephen Rutledge says, "Do you type, word process, or handwrite?"
I type. I came
Well,
of age in the time when computers were beginning to be a big thing, and I think as a typer now, it's would be very difficult for me to write longhand, because although I tend to write relatively linearly, I will jump around and add a couple words here or a sentence here or whatever. Like I type with the word process as my vehicle.
mhm.
I occasionally will dictate. I'm not good at dictating yet. I would love to become better at dictating, but I will dictate scenes if it's like living in my brain right then and there, and I will dictate, like when I'm driving, or if I'm in a situation where that's the best vehicle for getting the thought out. Occasionally I'll write notes longhand and then dictate those into the computer, but mostly I type. Unfortunately, it's how I work. It's not great for my hands, but
It's what you have to do. It's what you have to do. Did you find any particular one of your novels to be more difficult to write
ooh,
than
yes,
others?
definitely. Blameless was, I'm very open about this. Blameless was the hardest early book I had to write. And that was because it was the first book that I wrote that needed a huge revision pass. And it was absolutely the correct call that my editor made. So, Solus had very little revising and Changeless had very little revising, but Blameless had some serious issues that needed to be fixed. And my editor was absolutely correct. They needed to be fixed. And so that was the first time I dealt with that. And so I found that challenging, but I've since kind of learned better with that on how to do larger revisions. And then Prudence was a freaking nightmare. So I signed a contract for the Finishing School series of books, and then I also signed the contract for the Custard Protocol series of books. And my plan was to write one and then the other, to swap back and forth. But it turns out I can't do that. Lesson learned, but I didn't know at the time. And so basically I was under contract for the Finishing School books, and the first book had already come out, and I had just finished the second one. And I started writing the first Custard Protocol book, which is Prudence, and the voice was just muddled. Like Prudence sounded like half like Alexia and half like Sophronia, and she wasn't developing her own personality, and it was a total nightmare. And my creative brain was like, no, we cannot handle two long running series at a time. Like you can do one long running series and then something completely different, like sci-fi or whatever, but you can't do two. Just turns out I can't handle that. And so I basically had to turn around, sort of hat in hand, and shamefacedly go to my adult publisher, Orbit, and my editor there, and be like, I can't do this. So either, and I was a lot of firsts for my agent. I was like, I'm sorry, agent, like you might have to buy me back out of contract, which she's never done before. And so we had to go to Orbit and be like, you got to let Gail buy out of contract. In other words, return my advance. Or you can wait 2 years while I finish out the rest of the Finishing School series as quickly as possible, which meant that Prudence was going to be delayed by at least 3 years. And unfortunately for me, Orbit was like, we will wait. But I was very embarrassed to have to do that. And it was the first time I had to blow a deadline, and I'm still rather ashamed of the whole thing, but it was something I just didn't know my brain was going to be like, nope, one at a time. One is all you can handle.
It's like you say, lesson learned, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing. Given your wonderful sense of fashion, have you ever been interested in writing stories set in or evoking the 40s and 50s?
So I joke often that I really, especially during the urban fantasy bubble, someone should write suburban fantasy, which would be like a Mad Men but vampires, right? Like, wouldn't that be awesome? But I mean, as a general, it is my favorite fashion to wear, but I'm not a fan of the history of the time period. And my personal general rule, so far as historical is concerned, is when nobody's wearing corsets anymore, I'm not really interested. So my interest sort of ends at the turn of the century. and that's just, you know, to be like cruelly frank, like, so that the engines of war just get too awful and too gruesome for me. You know, when World War One and it
Yeah,
start rolling around, and
that's
it
that's
just,
yeah,
yeah,
that's what set the tone for the 20th century in a real historical manner, is
yeah.
the things that led up to and included World War One. Oh yeah.
And so
I'm
I just don't, the archaeologist in me isn't interested. It's too much just history. And and the writer in me isn't interested because it's much harder to find the comedy and the parody nature, once, you know, kind of globalization and global warfare come into play.
mhm.
So
Well, and in fact, some of the things that I remember now, it's just me relying on my admittedly fallible memory. The some of the elements of your Parasol Protectorate do kind of point to the stuff that is waiting in the wings in the late 19th and early 20th century. And it's
yeah.
always interesting to see those hints carried out in a universe that's different from ours. So, but it
And part
gives
of that
you,
is I kind of write my historical approach with the assumption that things are still going to follow the same general timeline, so
mhm,
that it's not alt history. I never take a battle and make it go the other way.
mhm,
The timeline is going to rebound, so we end up with the with my version of the present, which would be kind of this present, so to speak.
mhm.
um and so, yeah, that's part of it, is that although I write kind of utopias, you know, rose tinted glasses kind of thing, I wouldn't feel comfortable writing out some of the heavier stuff. And so
I don't see
yeah,
what you write as being utopian as much as optimistic,
yeah,
moving in a positive way towards a positive future.
I
This is,
hope.
yeah, and that's a good thing. We want good things for people, and that's why we're doing what we're doing.
Yeah, I hope so. It is that eternal struggle, which, you know, I talk about in the heroine's journey, which is like, you know, the optimism of the heroine's journey is writing towards a connection and you know, a solidarity with other people, and with, you know, success built on networking and communication and
Mhm.
love, plutonic or non-plutonic or whatever. And so that makes it hard to avoid being perceived as cheesy. So I tend to err in favor of hopefully being perceived as fluffy.
Well, uh, uh, okay.
Thank you.
um, how do you go about fleshing out your characters?
Mm,
When you say, well, Alexia needs to have a daughter, well, I need to have somebody to go to this finishing school and be what they need to be. How
yeah.
do you go about building that character?
So I will shamelessly base my characters on people from real life. Of course, there's no similarity between my characters and any person living or dead. Mm,
Obviously,
obviously.
you're a creative writer, and it all
Exactly. It's
springs full
all
blown from your brain, from
completely
your creative
imaginary.
process. Sure.
But I like to say that my friends, when they're drunk, are very heavily influential on my stuff. Um, historical, little known historical people are very interesting to me. So Alexia is based on, at least partly based on, Amelia B. Edwards, who was a early Victorian female Egyptologist, or early, you know, sort of Egyptologist. And so, you know, so historical influences, but sort of as a writing advice thing, I really enjoy giving my readers personality quizzes. You know, like I will give them like the Jungian, what's is it, the Myers-Briggs tests, and figure out what that is. Um, and I really like the love languages. So if I'm writing a romance, I like my characters to figure out what their love language is, and how it's different from their romantic partner's love language, and how they're going to end up communicating together. A very good piece of advice, which did not come from me, and I'm afraid I can't remember who taught it to me, but I like to give out, is writers are really good at coming up with what is special, unique, or strong, or the strength of their characters. But I think every character should also have a void, which is something that they're searching for, or that they need, or that they lack, or that is a weakness. So, and that void can be emotional acumen, which is one of Alexia's voids. Is she's very, very pragmatic and practical, which is a strength for her because she never overreacts to crazy situations. But she's also really unintuitive about other people's emotions because she doesn't really have very strong emotions herself. And that's sort of part of her soullessness. And so she has this void where she ends up being paired with a character who is over emotional and overreacts all the time. And then she can't handle it. She's just like, what are you doing? And so that is a vehicle for comedy, but also it's a vehicle for her to realize that one of her voids is also loneliness, that she doesn't belong, and she's trying to find her place in the universe, but she also feels very alone.
Finding the family, as you say.
Exactly, and finding her family. And so I think it's very important for writers to think about not just what is strong about your character, but also what they need and what they lack. And of course, if you're writing a romance, then the two component parts also have voids that can be filled by each other. And that's what makes for, as far as I'm concerned, a really great romance, but also a really great friendship.
Yeah. Yep. That's, absolutely. The question that I have written down here is, do you hide secrets in your books that only a select few people will find?
Yes, I do. Sometimes there are insider jokes amongst me and my friends. Sometimes there are insider jokes amongst me and a reader base. So there's a Douglas Adams joke in Soulless, for example. And so and I love it because only like 6 people will write me an email. They'll be like, oh, I got you. I figured that one out. And I just love it when that happens. Occasionally it's an expertise joke. So I'll put an archaeological joke. Like there's an archaeological joke in the latest San Andreas Shifter book. Colin uses an insult that archaeologists often use, so that just stuff like that. And then I also do cookies quite a bit, which is like Easter eggs, but I call them cookies, which are rewards for my very careful readers. So people who reread my books, for example, will catch things. I hope on each new reread, you'll catch a new joke. And every time I write a new book in the same universe, it often has a callback to one of the other books that will make something from that book clear all of a sudden. So if you're a very careful reader of my books, you'll get sort of insider jokes as well. It shouldn't affect your understanding of the book if you only read it once or whatever. But I do like to have little prizes for people who are really judicious about how careful they're reading books.
And I'm sure that you can't believe that somebody would only be able to read your book once.
Well, yeah, I'm a rereader, so I always assume people reread many times. But I know many people who don't reread. So.
Well, we only have a very few minutes left. I would like to get to the 3 questions that are in the Q&A, and if we've still got time, then we'll worry about other stuff. What was your inspiration for the San Andreas Shifters?
Oh, my youth, I think. A large part of growing up here in the Bay Area, and my crazy aunties and uncles in the art world and the hippie world and stuff. I also
hippies in the Bay Area? I can't believe that.
And I just really I love the idea of a werewolf pack. It's one of the reasons I keep gravitating towards it. It's this sort of band of brothers sort of concept. And I was like, of course it's going to be a big group of gay dudes gay werewolves who move to the Bay Area. Like, what else would happen in the Bay Area? And it just seemed like so much fun to write them. The actual thing is that I wrote marine biology by request as a short story, which I really don't do anymore, for an anthology. And I just loved the alpha character and his partner from that short story so much. I wanted to give them a whole pack, and then everything just came bursting forth from there. Yeah.
There you Since you have developed so many rich characters, do you have a favorite, or have you, or is there one that you identify with more than others?
So Lord Uncle Dom is one of my favorites because he's easy to write. I tend to really gravitate towards characters that are very snappy and sort of sunshiny and sparkly. So I like Trick and Marvin, two of the characters from the San Andreas books, quite a bit. So characters like that sort of, I call them the sunshine characters. I also really love a quiet, kind of quietly competent, beta, mild-mannered character. So like Lyle is a real favorite of mine.
Oh, sure.
And you'll notice I gravitate towards writing those kinds of characters kind of a lot. They balance each other really well. So we'll have sort of outrageous characters and then big, quiet teddy bear characters opposite each other. So yeah, those are the ones that I identify very strongly often with my main characters, but I think bits of me are in all of my characters.
What makes them live?
Yeah.
It's what makes them live is being able to put a little bit of yourself into the
and I
too.
include the worst characters in that list and the evil ones, and you know.
Sure.
Yeah.
It says, is there a time period you would love to visit in your writing that you haven't yet?
Yeah, I'd love to write some more classical archaeological classics based, so ancient Rome, or Greece, places like that. You know, I don't know if I would make it clock punk or just write an all history. I don't know what I would do with it, but I love, obviously, I love sort of ancient archaeological stuff. So one of my minors, and one of the reasons I wrote The Heroine's Journey, is I have a minor in classics. So, you know, my focus was classical archaeology as an undergraduate. So yeah, a lot of those places I think would be really fun to write in.
That's, yeah, I've got an idea, a novel book idea that's set in ancient Philistine. And I don't know enough archaeology to write it.
Yeah, I would lean on places that I've had actual experience with. So Romano-Britain would be a really fun time period to write. I have a mystery story I'd love to set in a Romano-British setting, but I don't like, there are times, it's just so much research and it's so challenging and it's so outside of my wheelhouse that I'm like, you know, that's a retirement plan. You know, we'll put that one on the back burner.
Okay, it's sure when you've got time to do something else, when you're bored with everything else.
Exactly.
Say, well, what should I do now? I'll just write this.
That thing, okay. Yes.
Does writing energize you or exhaust you?
Depends. Sometimes sometimes mostly it exhausts me, and then sometimes I'm really, really lucky and I hit what I call the fugue state, which is like the muse working through me, and then I'm energized by it. I'm very energized by a lot of the tasks that are tangential to writing. So like I had to draw a map recently, and it's been so long since I wrote fantasy or like alt world fantasy that it's been, you know, a decade since I've gotten to draw a map, and I was so excited to draw a map for this book that I'm currently working on. I was like, oh, I forgot how much fun that is. So those sorts of things excite me. Doing a meticulous work to keep track of things like a timeline or something, those always make me happy. I'm more energized by things that are tangential to writing. That means I don't have to write than I am by anything else. Like most writers are pretty much do anything not to write.
Yeah, it's either that or they'll do anything to sit down and write rather than do anything else. It's one way or the other. How much research? This is kind of a strange question because it's tied to your whole archaeology background and everything too. But like when in all of the Victorian stuff that you have produced, the knowledge.
Forgive me for breaking in, but we're at the end of the meeting and somebody is going to kill us shortly if I don't.
Okay, well then I will refrain from asking the question.
I can answer it really, really quickly, which is basically I raw write and I raw research about the same amount of time. So when I'm writing alt history, for every hour I write, I usually spend about an hour on research, which is another reason I switched to writing the San Andreas books, because I don't have to stop and research all the time.
We thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Encourage everybody to read Gail Carriger's books. They are a delight and entertaining and a lot of fun, as is Gail Carriger herself. And we thank you very much for your time. enjoy the con. And if anybody wants to continue the conversation, they can go over to the Discord room, Opal Night Track 2.
And I will be on the late night panel tonight on writing sexy.
You'll the
So
love.
that's my last panel. So hopefully I'll see some of you there.